Hello and welcome to Signals from the Hill. I'm Kat from Avery Hill Publishing, and in this episode I'm going to be talking to Lizzy Stewart and Molly Naylor, whose book Lights, Planets, People came out in September. But first, some Avery Hill news. This month we've just launched our first ever Kickstarter campaign, which is to fund our Spring 2022 line. There are 3 books involved in the campaign. 2120 by George Weilersall, who previously published Ghosts, etc. and Internet Crusader with us. Sleeping While Standing by Taki Somar, who's a creator we're working with for the first time. Very excited about her book. And Outer Wilderness by Claire Scully. We've previously worked with Claire on the other books in her series, Internal Wilderness and Desolation Wilderness. So this is the 3rd book with Claire. It's a really cool and interesting and varied selection of books. So I highly recommend taking a look. I'll include the link below. Lights, Planets, People by Molly Naylor and Lizzy Stewart is just one of the books we've put out this year. Head over to averyhillpublishing.com for more information on all our books. They're also available from all good bookshops, and digital editions can be found on our Gumroad shop. So I'm here with Molly Naylor and Lizzy Stewart, who are the author and illustrator of Lights, Planets, People, which is was published in September, was it, with Avery Hill Publishing. Molly, I wonder if you could give a really brief kind of overview of what the book is about.
So the book, I'm so sorry if you hear a weird shaking noise, it's this guy. That's him shaking his ears. So that's what's going on. It's a dog, not a person. But yeah, so the book is about a woman called Maggie, who is a space scientist, and she's at a very interesting point in her career. She's 60 and she has just undergone the biggest mission of her life, the biggest sort of career milestone, but it didn't go according to plan. And she is now in this position where she's got to give a lecture to a group of young women who are interested in STEM, interested in science, and she's got to go and give this talk based on this sort of monumental thing that's just happened to her, and she's scared of doing it, so she is having some therapy to sort of deal with her panic attacks. She's also got bipolar disorder, and she is dealing with a recent breakup, which was sort of quite heartbreaking in a way that she's not really yet even able to address. So the book is in 3 parts. It's the lecture to the girls, it's the interspersed with the therapy session that's already happened, and then flashbacks to sort of explore both the relationship breakdown and the big career mission. That's, well, I won't tell you exactly what happened with it, but didn't go according to plan. So there's these 3 strands that then sort of help us build this picture of who she is and what she's just undergone and what might be about to happen to her next.
And one thing that's been intriguing me is I was really curious whether you had read a lot of comics before this project came about, or whether it was kind of quite new to you.
I had, yeah. So I'd read I'm not sort of an avid comics guy, but I sort of read them in the same way I sort of dip into poetry or philosophy. I sort of maybe read like 1 graphic novel a year or something, one that sort of takes my fancy. So it's more like the story that would appeal to me rather than the form itself. I've always loved the form, but I wouldn't sort of necessarily hunt out graphic novels. But if one came into my path that looked amazing, you know, then I would read it. Yeah. So I wouldn't say I was like, I did feel like I was sort of new to the form, but I felt very comfortable with Lizzy because I knew that she was old to the form.
Wow. What a burn.
Lizzy, how does that make you feel?
I mean, old to the form, I guess. Yeah.
So because you 2 kind of knew of each other's work already, is that right? How did that come about?
So I knew I'd been given a book of Molly's poetry years ago from a friend, and I really liked that. And it went back maybe 2012 this was. So then I sent Molly an email just because it's sometimes nice to send people emails when you like their work. And and said, I think this is beautiful, and she sent me a very nice response, probably keeping the crazy fan at arm's length, potentially, and said nice things, and like, oh, maybe we should work together in the future. And then we didn't really, I mean, we didn't know each other particularly in real life before we started working on this, but we did have people in common that could vouch for, like, oh, they're not a crazy person,
Yeah.
or they're not like someone who's going to wander off mid-project or whatever. I think that was really useful to have those people in common that could say, oh, that's going to be a real thing. If she's pitching it, it's a real thing. So that was useful. But yeah, I'd been aware of her work. I'd been to see a couple of her shows. So it was really exciting when to get the email a couple of years ago to say I've got this show and maybe it could be something else. Because I guess the dream is that someone you respect and like the work of comes to you with that stuff, and it's not some person off the internet who's got to reckon about that they might be good at this thing.
You do get those emails sometimes.
Will you illustrate my 500 epic orc fantasy or something? I'm not, because
I mean, Molly, you do work in theatre and all sorts, which is quite a sort of naturally collaborative art form, but I think illustration and making comics can be quite a solitary art form. So I can relate to what you're saying about feeling wary of going into collaborations and things and not knowing quite how that's going to go, but it sounds like it went really well for you too.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I was sort of nervous about approaching Lizzy because I had grown to be a real admirer of her work as I've become more familiar with it. But I don't mind just sort of asking if people want to collaborate, because I feel like it's their responsibility if they want to say no. And my friend Tim Clare, he's really sweet. He's like, I talked to him about the book, and he was like, said how scared he was, like, well, what if I ask them, and what if they do want to collaborate, and then what if like they just say that they will out of like politeness, and then they end up stuck with me. I'm like, I just think that's their problem if that happens. So,
and it's a lovely thing to do, like you said, Lizzy, to just let someone know that you've enjoyed their work, because I think a lot of people kind of forget that they can do that, and they just enjoy something and that's it. And it's really nice to reach out to an artist and just tell them how much you enjoyed what they made. So Molly, was it quite exciting, the idea of kind of revisiting this story, which was in the play form, was kind of a finished story, but I guess it must have been quite exciting to think about how you might be able to expand it further for the book?
Yeah, it really was. And I didn't really have that many ideas about that when I first approached Lizzy. I just knew that, I don't know, something would have to happen, but I didn't want to think too much about it almost before I sort of got Lizzy to sign on to the project. And then when she said that she was potentially up for it, but had sort of noticed that the play was very wordy because it is essentially just a monologue, that was the point where I was like, I'm going to have to expand my thinking now and think about, how to sort of visualize it and dramatize it in a different way. And that was now I feel like I want to go back and do the play again, but with the new bits that we created for this.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Gosh, that would be so strange. It would be a really interesting experiment to kind of go back to it.
Yeah. So did you write did you write it as a script with a graphic novel in mind and send that to Lizzy?
Yeah, so I wrote it, well, first of all, I think we just spoke, and I managed to convince her, but then I turned what was a very sort of dialogue heavy stage play into a screenplay. So then it became a visual, because I don't know if you've have read a screenplay or seen a screenplay, probably have, but like, you know, it's just describing action. That's all it is. It's describing action and dialogue. And so then that's the sort of perfect place for an artist to start, because then they're looking at, you know, action rather than just words, right? So it's not like Lizzy had to go, okay, so she's saying all this stuff, but what is she doing? It was like I was then had written what she was doing as well, which was really nice. So now it's like, yeah, I sort of have this screenplay version of it as well, but it's sort of just, you know, they're ready for anyone who wants to adapt it.
Brilliant. And did you already have an interest in the sort of space science angle and the mental health angle? Were those kind of topics that you were already interested in, or did they just sort of come about as you developed the story initially?
The mental health stuff, I feel like that always comes into my projects. The space stuff was really new, and that was based off a little sort of experimental writing residency that I was invited to go on with a company called theatre company called China Plate, and they were sort of pairing together scientists and artists in a sort of exciting week of like, have some chats and see what happens and see if anything comes of it. And I got really obsessed with this guy Don Polacco, who's a space scientist. So I sort of based Maggie's mission on, because he's launching a real mission in real life to find exoplanets, or, you know, habitable exoplanets outside of this solar system, which was just so fascinating to me, and so sort of also quite tangible, because I feel like that I understand that. I mean, it's mad and it's huge and it's complex, but I understand that as a name, whereas so much of science feels like, you know, I was sort of talking to people about solar flares and, you know, and kind of going, but this, it was like, no, I know that he's launching a mission to find another planet for us to live on when we ruin this one. And that just felt like, wow, that's kind of baffling, but also very, very, very clear.
Yeah. And so Lizzy, did you say that you had seen the stage version of this?
No, I never saw the stage version.
Okay.
I'd seen other shows that Molly had done in the past, but this one I think kept missing, and then it was done. So in the end, although like I've watched the trailer, and watching the trailer having finished the book, I didn't watch the trailer till I'd finished drawing the book. I found it quite like, oh my gosh. I found it quite emotional, quite like, it's real. There it is, it's real. And I think if I saw the play now, I would probably bawl all the way through it. Just because it's too, I think it's now like, the project's just become a part of you, and you become a part of that character, and that character is in you, and it would just be I think slightly unbearable for the rest of the audience if I was there. But it was definitely kind of useful not seeing it, so not feeling tied to, or not even that I didn't feel tied to, but so originally Maggie was played by Karen
Hill.
Oh my gosh, useless. And in order for the book to be a different thing, I didn't want to just be drawing Karen throughout. It had to, because there are different other limitations to drawing a book that mean that basing it on too much on an exact reality can be debilitating. So I think it would have been hard to get her out of my head. So I think it's useful, but now I would like to see it. Please, will you stage it?
Yes, it has to go back on stage so everyone that read the book can see it again. I mean, I find Maggie a really compelling character myself. So I kind of imagine that, Lizzy, you must have felt that when you kind of read the screenplay that Molly wrote. I love the opening, and I think so many people can relate to someone hiding in a toilet and giving themselves a talking to, you know, just trying to get ready for this scary thing. What were some of your first impressions when you read it, Lizzy?
It's very hard to go back to like the first version of a thing that you come to know very intimately, because it's like almost like looking at a different thing. Like when I think about like the first version of a city that I've lived in, the first day that you're there, it looks completely different to all the subsequent days. So I think when I first saw it, I was initially just having, I think, quite a panic about science in general. Just had a science panic because that was way beyond what I normally write about, and why I think initially maybe in first reading that sort of eclipsed what was actually there, that was like an amazing character study, which is like the thing that I love the most in all stories. And then when I really got stuck in, like just reading Maggie, an older woman, a scientist, a queer woman, a woman who is struggling with her mental health, was just like, oh gosh, I want her to be real and I want her to be in a book. And she was just so vividly drawn in words, not pictures, and refreshing compared to the other graphic novels that I'd read over the past few years. She was a break from what had perhaps become a set of like standardized characters who you can pick out in different books over and over again. So she was very exciting, and her world was like, I don't think this exists, and I wanted to.
I really appreciated an older sort of protagonist, because I think there's something in comics where there's an awful lot of kind of YA type books, and a lot of books that are about people's kind of formative experiences. And so I really like reading about characters that are a little bit older, because it's a bit rare, I think, in comics. My last book, I wrote about characters that were kind of in their 40s, and I was so happy to be able to do that. But
I totally feel the same about your book, actually. It was like so refreshing to feel like you're in a world that has got past that initial panic stage, only to discover there's 20 more panic stages.
There's more panics, slightly different ones.
Yeah. Which sounds like it's not refreshing at all, but it is in some way reassuring.
Yeah. So what was it in particular that you found really interesting about Maggie as a character?
I like that she's so foul, grumpy. I don't know. That she's not very nice to a lot of people by accident.
Yeah.
But she's really trying. And I don't know, she's relatable in that sense, because I think the first thing that she thinks, to me, it feels like the first thing that she thinks accidentally comes out. And then she has to pedal back a bit a few times. Certainly in the lecture, she goes hard a few times and getting angry, and then remembers that she's in a room of teenagers, and she's maybe alienated them or something. And I just like, beyond the more complex stuff about mental health and that kind of thing, the initial affection that I felt for her was just, she says the wrong thing. I don't really like that.
Yeah. I mean, I love a flawed character. It's kind of, what's interesting about people, really. And I love that she's got that kind of prickly quality, even though she doesn't really intend it. I liked your use of the kind of hand lettering in the therapy scenes, which has the two different styles of lettering for the two characters. And Maggie's is quite kind of harsh and like, is it capital letters? And it's quite, I don't know, I just felt like the way you did that was really clever to show kind of, it showed a lot about those two characters. And it's something you might not, you might not even notice, but every little thing was kind of telling you something about what was going on. Maggie, Molly, did the character of Maggie evolve at all over the course of, being a play and then the book, or did she stay kind of consistent?
It's funny you call me Maggie. When I was directing Karen, she always used to call me Moggy. So she would kind of mix up Molly and Maggie. She now just calls me Moggy. But Yeah, she did grow a little bit. So I think she grew because of working with Karen. So before I cast Karen and started working with her, because we worked quite closely together in the rehearsal room, I think Maggie was sort of, I don't know, like a bit more holy than she turned out to be, like a bit better and a bit more of a sort of like she's trying and the world's against her. And and then as soon as Karen came into the space, and I cast Karen because she's from the Black Country and I wanted that accent, but I also, there was something about the quality Karen brought to her that was, there was very blunt. There was like a bluntness and like a terseness about the way she delivered the lines that I really liked. And I was like, yeah, she's not that. It's not that she's sort of got like these like sort of problems communicating. It's that she's got this urgency where she's like, there's no time, there's no time for bullshit. There's no time for obfuscation or pleasantries, because there's this mission that she's got, and that sort of like filters out the rest of her life. I just think there's an urgency there and a singularity. So that's why like she's so in love with Jane, but she's only looking at the thing right in front of her. And I think a lot of scientists are like that. A lot of the scientists I met in the research period, they sort of have to be, because it's so overwhelming, this sort of work. And I guess some artists are like that as well, where you're just like absorbed in this project.
Yeah.
And like she doesn't mean to be like an asshole, but like she is being one, and then she pays the price for that, like the ultimate price really of like losing the person she loves, maybe, who knows, but no spoilers. But I think that's like, I just think, yeah, I used to always write nice characters, or try to, and I'm just so done with it now. I'm just so uninterested, and especially with women, because I think there's a lot in real life, white women are socialized to be nice, and it's very different, isn't it? Like these flawed male characters are so fascinating, and like, but I want to do the same for women, and I think a lot of writers are doing that now, and kind of recognizing that we shouldn't be sort of putting women on this weird pedestal and or having like a kind of conditional relationship with them. It's like, I'll engage with this woman if she is pleasant or amenable or any of those things. It's like, no, like equality is like, we're all the worst.
Yeah. Yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect of her character as well. The sort of the high achiever and the perfectionist, and that leading to her feeling really kind of self-sufficient, like she doesn't need anybody else. And it's really interesting the way it unfolds over the book, that she comes to she's sort of forced to accept that connections with other people are important after all. So yeah, I think it was really beautifully done. I love the transitions between the sort of different scenes with the therapist and with the lecture. Just sort of reinforces what's going on. Like she'll be sort of contending in one scene with one particular problem, and then it'll shift into a different setting, and it's the same problem again, but in a different context. So there's just so much layered stuff going on. I really, really enjoyed it. I also enjoyed the fact that she's somewhat of a sort of unreliable narrator in the story, because reading through it again just before doing this interview, I kind of was really enjoying that fact that as the reader, you're kind of privy to some stuff about her that she's sort of oblivious to. Was that something that was sort of intentional, Molly?
Yeah, and I love that, using that as a device, and I think all the best stories do, really, because we're trying to. It's a good story is like a journey of learning, isn't it, for a character? And so, but before they learn the thing, they've got to not know the thing, and it's satisfying to us when we as the audience do know the thing. And I perform in live shows as well that are sort of often like true, and I've noticed that it's harder to do the sort of unreliable narrator thing when I'm talking about myself or in my own poetry, because I think I don't know, like I've had audiences like they don't realize you're doing it, and they just think you're presenting yourself as a bit of bit of an idiot on stage or something. And so it's something that I feel like, yeah, it was really nice to be able to do that and not, and sort of trust in that device and know that would hopefully work with Maggie. And I wanted people to be very frustrated with her, you know, at points, and to feel like, oh, but also understand her, but you know, and then so if you do feel sort of sad about the choices she makes, it's with that sort of investment as well, because you've sort of watched her have these opportunities to grow and change, and maybe not quite get there, but it's almost like she will get there, like 2 months after the book ends.
Yeah, definitely. Lizzy, how did you approach the sort of visual style of the book? Because there's different styles for different kind of sections.
Yeah, so I was lucky that the structural tricky stuff and complex kind of building of the story had been done for me, which is a real perk to not writing your own books, which I didn't know about. I didn't realize that if someone else writes it, you don't have to do quite so much logistical thinking. So I was just presented with this beautiful script that was like very structurally sound. You know, like you could shake it about and wobble it, and it stayed in place in a really useful way to be able to then hang pictures over the top of it. Like the foundations were firm, and so the separate sections, although in a script they kind of bleed into one another, they were so clear. Like the lecture theatre as a setting, the mood of that room is so clear that it starts out very uneasy, becomes more uneasy, and then becomes kind of this glorious revelatory moment. But so that had a very clear vibe, I guess. And then the therapy is obviously more intimate. So I went from kind of a very muted palette in the lecture, or simplified palette of kind of just orange for the color of the room, and then to therapy, which is softer and more intimate and a conversation. So that's all drawn in colored pencil and has more colors, so is more related to real life, I suppose. And then to flashbacks, which are all blue toned, I think. I don't know, the past is blue. I don't know. And then through to the kind of the depression section, I suppose, which suddenly felt weird to treat that in the same kind of clean way that I treated some of the other stuff, which was drawn by hand but colored digitally. So that ended up being kind of painted in ink, because it felt I guess more tender, I suppose. But because the sections of the book were so clear, coming up with a visual response was totally instinctive. And obviously, had you given it to another artist, they would come up with different mechanisms for that. But I think it would be sort of the same. I don't think you could draw this book as in one visual style all the way through, because you would lose, like, kind of what you were saying earlier about the way the three sections kind of bleed in and out of each other in terms of Maggie's behavior, but not in terms of what is actually happening. I think, yeah, it kind of has to be separate visually. That's a very, very chaotic answer to a very, very clear question. But,
it's so nice that like you could just do it intuitively, and like it was right straight away when like Lizzy would send me stuff and be like, the therapist is crayon, and it's just like, yeah, obviously, like it just felt really obvious, and it's like you could talk about those things for hours, and but it's, I don't know, it's not sort of a word choice, is it? It's like a bodily choice, or a, like, I don't know, it's like it's not that logical, I don't think, but it just feels right.
Yeah.
It's bodily. Yeah, that's true. There's got my grubby paws and some coloured pencils. Did the therapy bit.
Yeah, because I'm also interested in that you work in so many different sort of mediums, Molly, and I wonder whether your work kind of informs each other when you go from kind of writing poetry to writing for stage. And I don't know, do you think it does, or do you think it's all quite different?
I think the thing that's the same is that it's like scenes, I'm always writing in scenes, and I think that's really useful to take out of like screenwriting. Obviously you're writing scenes, but I think it's really useful to take that into other forms, so into like poetry, where it's better to put it's better if a poem is a scene and not like, here's what I think about this. It's better if it's like you're describing something. So I think that visual way of telling stories that I've sort of learned from screenwriting, I think that has permeated the other strands of my work and made them better, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I worked for many years at the National Theatre and watched kind of all of the shows that they had on for years and years. And I was trying to think whether that had any effect on my work. And I think there's something about watching actors working that's helped me visualize how to depict people kind of behaving in different ways, and the kind of body language and facial expressions. I find that all really, really enjoyable. So
and yeah, probably also the dynamics between them, right? Because that's such a thing in theatre.
Yes.
And actually,
yeah,
I guess that if you just coming from comics, I suppose obviously that's a big thing, but it's not as three-dimensional.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you don't have the actor's voice in a comic. There's no kind of voice that you hear. I guess the reader hears it in their head, but there's so much you have to kind of try and do visually. So what are you both working on next? I think I saw on Molly's Instagram that there was something happening in a theatre not too long ago.
Yeah, so I'm just finally staging a live show, an autobiographical, like stand-up storytelling poetry combination-y show that I wrote before COVID. I was supposed to take to Edinburgh before COVID, and now I finished it, and I'm trying to, I'm not trying, I am performing it. It does feel like I'm trying.
Yeah.
And trying, I guess, to work out like what it is and how that's in the world. So that's what I'm doing. And then I've also got like a screenplay project in development as well. And but like definitely want to come back to comics at some point, for sure.
Brilliant. Do you feel like that you learned a lot about comics through this collaboration? Was there anything that sort of took you by surprise at all?
I don't know, really. I learned a lot from just like the publishing process, and also like seeing how Lizzy works. Like that was the main thing, I suppose. It's like seeing how the artist works and how those stages that you go through, which is really, really interesting. And just like I'm just in awe of like the sheer amount of work that goes into a project for you guys, for the artist, and like especially if you're writing it as well. Like gosh, I just I mean I was sort of assumed that anyway, but like I have more admiration, because like when I wrote the screenplay, then I hand it over to Lizzy, and then she's like the director and the cinematographer and the costume designer and the set designer. Like she's doing all those jobs.
Yeah.
I'm just the screenwriter, and it's like wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot you have to pay attention to. And Lizzy, what about you? What are you doing next?
What am I doing next? At the moment I'm writing a comic, like a short comic for an anthology, which I think because of Lights, Planets, People, somehow someone has found out that I've illustrated a science comic, and now I have to do another one, which is making me actively mad. And I had to have like a Zoom conversation with an actual physicist the other night, and
Wow.
my notes are just complete nonsense. I'm like, oh, and the particle is traveling as a wave, 30 exclamation marks. I'm like, okay, but how does this relate to what I'm meant to be doing? So I'm trying to get to grips with quantum physics mostly. And then I've got a book out next year called Alison, that is a graphic novel which tells the story of the life of an fictional artist over the 80s, 70s, 80s and 90s in London.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
That sounds great. So thank you for talking to me. I will make sure that I list your websites and everything along with this episode. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Molly and Lizzy for taking the time to talk with me, and thank you for listening.